By the spring of 1943, the skies over Europe belonged to one air force, the German Luftwaffe. For 3 years, Nazi fighters had dominated every combat zone from the Channel to the Mediterranean. German pilots like Adolf Galland and Werner Mulders had become legends, racking up dozens of confirmed kills while flying superior aircraft like the Messerschmitt Bf 109. The Reich's propaganda machine broadcast their victories constantly. Hitler himself believed German air superiority was absolute, unbreakable, and for a long time, the evidence seemed to support that conviction. But in the spring of 1943, something shifted. The United States Air Force began deploying a new fighter aircraft into the European theater, a machine that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of aerial warfare and change the outcome of World War II itself. This is the true story of the P-51 Mustang, and how a single aircraft design challenged German dominance, turned the tide of the air war, and proved that technological innovation and strategic deployment could reshape the entire balance of power in the skies. This is not a legend. This is history. The story begins with a critical problem that American military strategists could not ignore any longer. By early 1943, the United States had committed to a bombing campaign against Nazi Germany, Operation Point Blank, designed to cripple German industrial capacity, destroy fuel production, and eliminate aircraft manufacturing. B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, the heaviest bombers in the American arsenal, would fly deep into enemy territory, carrying tons of ordnance to strike military targets across the Reich. But there was one catastrophic vulnerability. These bombers could not defend themselves adequately against German fighters, and American escort fighters did not have the range to fly all the way to Germany and back. The consequences were devastating. In August 1943, American B-17 bombers attacked the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, Germany. German fighters intercepted the formation over enemy territory. 60 American bombers were shot down that day. In October, another raid on Schweinfurt. 60 more bombers lost. Thousands of American airmen killed or captured. The bomber offensive was facing collapse because it lacked one essential element: long-range fighter escort. This was the moment when the P-51 Mustang entered the war, not as a legend or a myth, but as a solution born from necessity, from the desperation of American commanders who understood that without long-range fighter protection, the entire bombing strategy would fail, and with it, the hope of defeating Nazi Germany from the air. What happened next was not anticipated by the German High Command. What emerged from American aircraft factories in 1943 and 1944 would shatter the myth of Luftwaffe invincibility and prove that the air war over Europe had entered a new phase, one where the advantage belonged to those with the will to adapt, innovate, and deploy their technology with strategic precision. The P-51 Mustang did not emerge from American design genius alone. Its creation was born from a compromise, a challenge, and ultimately, a transformation that no one fully predicted. The story begins in 1940, when the British Royal Air Force faced a critical shortage of fighter aircraft. With Nazi Germany's Luftwaffe conducting the Battle of Britain, the RAF needed fighters immediately. The British approached American manufacturers with a simple request: build us a fighter aircraft quickly. North American Aviation, led by Chief Designer Edgar Schmid, responded with an ambitious proposal. They could design and build a prototype in just 120 days. The specification was clear. The aircraft needed to be fast, maneuverable, and equipped with American weapons and engines. The first prototype, designated NA-73, flew in September 1940. It was sleek, well-balanced, and fast, but it had a fundamental flaw. The engine, an Allison V1710, was designed for low-altitude performance. It lacked the power needed for high-altitude combat, where German fighters operated most effectively. For 2 years, the Mustang remained a competent but limited fighter. It performed well in low-altitude ground attack missions and served with distinction in North Africa and Italy, but it was not a match for the Bf 109 or the Focke-Wulf FW-190 in high-altitude dogfights. American pilots flew it, but the aircraft did not revolutionize anything. It was functional, reliable, but not dominant. The Luftwaffe took little notice. Then, in late 1942, a British test pilot, an engineer named Ronald Harker, proposed a radical solution. What if the Mustang's airframe, which was aerodynamically superior to anything the Germans flew, was paired with a different engine? What if they installed the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that gave the Supermarine Spitfire its legendary performance? The idea was unconventional. The Merlin was a British engine, designed for a different airframe. But Harker believed it would work. In April 1943, a Mustang equipped with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine flew for the first time. The transformation was immediate and shocking. The aircraft climbed faster, accelerated harder, and maintained speed at altitudes where American fighters had previously struggled. When test pilots pushed the new variant, designated the P-51B, to its limits, they achieved speeds exceeding 450 miles per hour at high altitude. For the first time, an American fighter could match the performance of the best German fighters, not just at sea level, but in the thin air where aerial combat truly took place. But performance alone would not solve the critical problem facing American air commanders. Even with the new Merlin engine, the P-51 still lacked the fuel capacity to fly all the way to Germany and back. The solution required additional innovation: drop tanks. External fuel tanks, designed to be jettisoned during combat, could extend the Mustang's range from approximately 1,000 miles to over 2,000 miles. This single modification transformed the P-51 from a valuable fighter into a war-winning instrument. By the summer of 1943, the first P-51B Mustangs equipped with Merlin engines and auxiliary fuel tanks began arriving in England. They were delivered to the 354th Fighter Group, an American unit stationed at Boxted Airfield in Essex. The pilots who flew them were experienced combat veterans, men who had already seen action in North Africa and understood what superior performance meant in actual combat. What they discovered during their first test flights was something even more significant. The P-51B was not just competitive with German fighters. In many ways, it was superior. The Mustang turned tighter than the Bf-109 at most altitudes. It accelerated faster in level flight. It climbed well. Its visibility was excellent, thanks to its bubble canopy, which gave pilots a clearer view of the sky around them. Most critically, with external fuel tanks, it could fly to Berlin and back, staying with the bomber formations every mile of the journey. For the first time in the air war over Europe, American bombers would have fighter protection all the way to their targets and all the way home. The German Luftwaffe command did not yet understand what was coming. Intelligence reports mentioned a new American fighter, but the implications were not immediately grasped. The Reich's Air Force had faced American fighters before. They had defeated them. Why would this one be different? On December 1st, 1943, the 354th Fighter Group flew its first combat mission with the P-51B Mustang. The target was Kiel, a German port city on the North Sea. 48 Mustangs escorted American B-17 bombers toward the target, while German fighters attempted to intercept. What happened that day set in motion a chain of events that would fundamentally alter the air war. The German pilots who engaged the P-51B that day encountered something unexpected. The American fighter was faster than they anticipated, more responsive, and capable of sustained combat at altitudes where German superiority had always been absolute. German pilots attempted classic tactics that had worked against earlier American fighters: climbing high, attacking from above and behind, attempting to force American fighters into slow-speed turns where German aircraft traditionally held advantages. But the P-51B pilots, trained and disciplined, held formation, used their superior performance characteristics, and, critically, they did not panic or break formation to pursue individual enemy aircraft. The results were measurable. The 354th Fighter Group destroyed 4 German fighters without losing any Mustangs. For American pilots, it was a successful first encounter. For the Luftwaffe, it represented something more ominous: the appearance of an American fighter that could compete on equal or superior terms in the high-altitude combat zone. Word spread through German fighter squadrons rapidly. Pilots reported that the new American fighter was not like the P-47 Thunderbolt, which was powerful but relatively slow and less maneuverable. This aircraft was different. It was sleek, fast, and handled well. Some German pilots speculated that it might be a new development of the Spitfire, based on its appearance and performance. Others recognized immediately that American aviation technology had made a significant leap. Over the following weeks, more P-51B Mustangs arrived in England. The 4th Fighter Group, one of the oldest and most experienced American fighter units, converted to the Mustang in January 1944. Veterans like Don Gentile and John Bud Anderson, pilots with extensive combat experience, took the new aircraft into action. What they discovered was that the Mustang responded to aggressive tactics. Unlike the P-47, which relied on speed and dive performance, the Mustang could engage German fighters in sustained dogfights and prevail through superior rate of climb, turn radius, and overall agility. The Luftwaffe began assigning its best pilots to units equipped with aircraft specifically designed to counter the Mustang threat. The FW-190D, a variant of the Focke-Wulf fighter with an upgraded engine and enhanced performance, was rushed into production. The Bf-109K, an improved variant of the Messerschmitt, was deployed to frontline units. German tactics adapted. Instead of attempting dogfights, German pilots were instructed to use their aircraft's diving capabilities to strike and disengage rapidly to avoid sustained combat with the new American fighter. But adaptation could not overcome the fundamental change that was occurring in the air war. By early 1944, American factories were producing P-51 Mustangs in increasing numbers. Pilot training was accelerating. Experience was accumulating. And most critically, the Mustang could do something that no other American fighter had been able to do with reliability and consistency. It could escort bombers all the way to their targets and back, maintaining performance at the altitudes where German fighters operated. The strategic implications became clear to senior American commanders by February 1944. General James "Jimmy" Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, understood that with the P-51 Mustang, the entire calculus of the European air war had shifted. The bomber offensive, which had suffered catastrophic losses just months earlier, could now proceed with adequate fighter protection. And if bombers could reach their targets reliably, with fighter escort throughout the journey, then German aircraft production, fuel facilities, and military infrastructure could be systematically destroyed. German commanders recognized the same reality, but from the opposite perspective. The Luftwaffe was facing an opponent that had superior numbers, superior production capacity, superior resources, and now, an aircraft that was at least competitive with, and in many respects superior to, the fighters that had dominated European skies for 3 years. The air war had entered a new phase. What happened next would determine whether the Luftwaffe could adapt and resist, or whether American air superiority would become absolute and lead to the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. With the P-51 Mustang now available in significant numbers and proven in combat, American air commanders launched a new and more ambitious bombing campaign. In February 1944, the 8th Air Force executed Big Week, a sustained, coordinated assault on German aircraft manufacturing facilities, engine plants, and airfields across occupied Europe. The operation was massive in scale and ruthless in execution. Wave after wave of B-17 and B-24 bombers, protected by Mustang fighter escorts, penetrated deep into German territory, striking targets that had previously been unreachable due to German fighter interception. The Luftwaffe responded with maximum effort. Every available fighter unit was committed to defending German airspace. What followed was a series of intense air battles that, for the first time in the European air war, American fighters won decisively and comprehensively. Mustang pilots, flying in disciplined formations with superior fuel capacity and range, stayed with the bomber streams, engaged attacking German fighters, and maintained the protective umbrella that allowed bombers to reach their objectives in return. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. During Big Week, February 20th to 26th, 1944, American and British bombers dropped over 9,000 tons of ordnance on German aircraft production facilities. The Luftwaffe launched furious interceptor attacks and inflicted damage on the bomber formations, but the losses were no longer sustainable on the German side. American pilots, equipped with the P-51 Mustang and supported by superior tactics and organization, destroyed German fighters at a rate that could not be replaced. One pilot in particular exemplified the new capabilities of the American fighter force. Major Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group scored multiple kills during Big Week, demonstrating the aggressive, tactical competence that characterized the best American pilots when equipped with an aircraft that could match German performance. Gentile, like other experienced Mustang pilots, understood that the aircraft was not invincible, but it was dependable, responsive, and when flown with skill and discipline, it was more than equal to any German fighter in the air. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was significant. German pilots who had flown with confidence and tactical superiority for years suddenly found themselves facing an opponent that could not be easily defeated through traditional tactics. German commanders recognized that the arrival of the P-51 Mustang represented a fundamental shift in the air-war balance. Conversations among German pilots became less confident. The certainty that had characterized Luftwaffe fighter operations for 3 years was replaced by calculation and caution. American commanders capitalized on this shift with strategic precision. The P-51 Mustang was not just assigned to escort duties. It was also deployed for aggressive patrol missions, flying ahead of bomber formations to sweep areas where German fighters might assemble. Mustang pilots engaged in what became known as target of opportunity combat, actively hunting German fighters and engaging them under conditions chosen by American pilots rather than imposed by German tactics. This represented a fundamental reversal of air war control. For 3 years, the Luftwaffe had enjoyed the luxury of choosing when and where to engage. German fighters operated from bases throughout Europe. They could concentrate forces against American bombing formations, strike, and withdraw to bases where they were relatively safe. The P-51 Mustang eliminated this advantage. With extended range, American fighters could penetrate deep into German territory, maintain combat capability for extended periods, and engage German fighters either defending their bases or attempting to reach bomber formations. The consequences for German aviation production were devastating. The aircraft manufacturing facilities that German engineers had built in scattered locations to avoid concentrated bombing now found themselves under sustained assault. Fighters that German pilots flew were being destroyed faster than factories could produce replacements. Experienced pilots who survived multiple missions understood that attrition was working against them. Germany was losing an air war of production and capability that it could not win. By March 1944, American air commanders had made a critical strategic decision. The air war over Europe would not be fought primarily for control of specific territories or cities. It would be fought for control of the air itself. And the P-51 Mustang, with its superior range, performance, and reliability, was the instrument that would secure that control. This decision set in motion operations that would continue for over a year and would fundamentally shape the outcome of World War II in Europe. The German High Command understood this reality. Dispatches from Luftwaffe commanders to Berlin became increasingly desperate. They reported that German fighters, despite excellent design and pilot training, were being systematically worn down. Production could not keep pace with losses. Pilot training, always rigorous, was being shortened due to fuel shortages and the need to get trained pilots into combat quickly. The air war, which had seemed winnable from the German perspective just months earlier, now appeared to be slipping away inexorably. From March through August 1944, the air war over Europe became a grinding battle of attrition that systematically favored the United States. The P-51 Mustang, operating from bases in England and later from continental airfields following the D-Day invasion, flew thousands of escort and patrol missions. The scale of the air campaign increased relentlessly. American pilots accumulated combat experience. German pilots, by contrast, faced increasing losses that could not be adequately replaced. The numbers became starkly visible in combat records and pilot survival statistics. American pilots, when shot down over friendly territory or over England, could often be recovered, treated for injuries, and returned to flying status within days or weeks. German pilots, shot down over German territory or enemy-held areas, were usually lost as combat personnel, even if they survived the crash. This asymmetry, multiplied across thousands of individual encounters, created a cumulative advantage that became progressively more pronounced. Specific battles illustrated the pattern. In April 1944, during escort missions to targets in central Germany, American Mustang pilots engaged Luftwaffe fighter units that attempted to intercept bomber formations. Pilot Don Gentile and his wingmen destroyed 5 German fighters in a single engagement while maintaining escort position for the bomber stream. This was not exceptional performance by 1944 standards. It was becoming routine. Multiple American pilots were regularly achieving multi-kill engagements against German fighters. The Luftwaffe attempted tactical innovations to counter the Mustang threat. Some German units concentrated large numbers of fighters to mass attacks against bomber formations, attempting to overwhelm American fighter escort through sheer numbers. These tactics occasionally succeeded in damaging bomber formations, but the cost in German fighters was invariably prohibitive. Mustang pilots, flying disciplined formations and using superior performance characteristics, could handle numerically superior German fighter forces and inflict losses that German replacement production could not sustain. General Adolf Galland, the inspector of German fighters and one of the Luftwaffe's most respected leaders, conducted a series of meetings with pilots and commanders throughout 1944 to assess the deteriorating air situation. His conclusions were increasingly pessimistic. The P-51 Mustang represented a technical achievement that equaled or exceeded German fighter capabilities. American pilot training was improving. American production of aircraft and pilots was vastly exceeding German capacity. And most critically, the Americans had learned to use their superior resources with strategic precision and tactical competence. In one documented conversation, Galland expressed to Hitler the strategic reality of the air war. Germany was facing an opponent with superior industrial capacity, superior numbers, and increasingly superior technology. Without a revolutionary new fighter aircraft, something that did not exist and could not be produced quickly enough, the Luftwaffe could not regain air superiority. The conversation reportedly ended with Hitler dismissing Galland's analysis and demanding that German fighters simply fight harder and shoot down more American aircraft. But no amount of determination could overcome the fundamental imbalance that the P-51 Mustang had created. By June 1944, when D-Day occurred and Allied forces invaded Normandy, American fighters, primarily Mustangs and Thunderbolts, established air superiority over the invasion beaches so completely that German aircraft were rarely seen. German attempts to counter the invasion from the air failed repeatedly due to American fighter superiority. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies, had been reduced to a secondary force operating defensively from bases increasingly threatened by advancing Allied ground forces. The invasion created additional strategic pressures on the Luftwaffe. German fighters had to defend against not only long-range bombing missions originating from England, but also tactical air operations supporting ground forces advancing from Normandy. Pilots who had survived months of combat found themselves flying multiple missions per day against American fighters and ground attack aircraft. Fatigue combined with rising casualty rates created a vicious cycle of degrading pilot quality and increasing losses. By August 1944, the Luftwaffe situation had become critical. German aircraft production, damaged by the bombing campaign, was declining. Pilot training programs, compromised by fuel shortages and the loss of experienced instructors to combat operations, were producing fewer trained pilots. Replacement aircraft were being produced at rates below losses. German commanders, assessing the situation, recognized that without a fundamental reversal in strategic conditions, the air war was lost. The true measure of the P-51 Mustang's strategic impact becomes clear when examining what it made possible: the sustained, systematic bombing campaign that devastated German war production. The aircraft itself was not a bomb dropper in most configurations. That remained the role of the B-17 and B-24 bombers. But the Mustang's primary strategic contribution was enabling those bombers to reach their targets reliably and return intact. Before the Mustang achieved operational effectiveness in numbers, American bombing campaigns suffered losses that threatened their viability. In the summer of 1943, bomber formations attacking targets in Germany without adequate fighter escort experienced casualty rates approaching 30%. Crews understood that volunteer for a bomber mission was, literally, accepting a high probability of death or capture. Morale declined. Experienced pilots rotated back to the United States, their expertise lost to the operational force. The bomber offensive appeared to be failing due to German fighter interception. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang in significant numbers changed this calculation completely. By early 1944, American bombers flying to targets in Germany had fighter escort throughout their journey. Mustang pilots, with superior range and performance, could not only protect bombers but actively engage German fighters before they reached the bomber formations. This reduction in losses meant that experienced pilots could complete longer tours of duty. Bomber crews that survived missions could be sent back to complete tour obligations rather than being rotated home. Production of trained air crews increased. Tactics improved through accumulated experience. The bombing campaign that followed was unprecedented in scope and accuracy. Oil production facilities in Romania and Germany were systematically destroyed. Ball bearing factories were repeatedly attacked until production ceased. Aircraft engine manufacturing, critically important for producing replacement fighters, was so thoroughly disrupted that German fighter production declined precipitously. Jet aircraft development, Germany's hope for regaining technological superiority, never reached the Luftwaffe in meaningful numbers because the factories producing components were either destroyed or their workers recruited for military service. By the second half of 1944, German cities were under sustained bombing assault. Hamburg, Dresden, Cologne, Berlin, and dozens of other cities experienced devastating air raids. German civilians, protected supposedly by their own air force, discovered that the Luftwaffe could not defend against American and British bombing. The air defense was increasingly relegated to anti-aircraft artillery and searchlights because German fighters, even when available, were outnumbered and often defeated by American escorts. This failure had profound psychological impacts on German civilian morale and on the population's confidence in Nazi leadership. The resources devoted to producing new Luftwaffe fighters, given the existing conditions, became increasingly questionable from a strategic perspective. The Me-262 jet fighter, Germany's most advanced aircraft, entered service in limited numbers in late 1944. It possessed significant performance advantages over the P-51 Mustang, being considerably faster at high altitude. But jet aircraft production was severely limited by the destruction of supporting industries, fuel shortages, and the need to divert resources to ground military operations. Only a few hundred Me-262s were produced before the war ended, compared to over 15,000 P-51 Mustangs eventually manufactured. Even when German fighters did engage Mustangs, the tactical situation had shifted fundamentally. Early in the war, German pilots possessed numerical superiority in specific sectors. By 1944 and 1945, American fighters almost always outnumbered German fighters in any given area. Combat experience and training, which had previously favored German pilots, now favor American pilots because American crews rotated home and were replaced by fresh, trained pilots, while German pilots either survived their deployments by avoiding combat or were eventually killed due to attrition. The psychological impact on German pilots became increasingly apparent in captured pilot interrogations and intelligence reports. German fighter pilots who had begun the war with confidence and tactical superiority found themselves in a steadily deteriorating situation. Experienced pilots were being killed faster than they could train replacements. The aircraft they flew were increasingly inferior or equivalent to American fighters. The missions they flew were increasingly defensive and increasingly costly. Some German pilots, recognizing the hopelessness of the situation, became less aggressive and focused on survival rather than combat. Others flew with determination and skill until killed or captured. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe had essentially ceased to exist as an effective air force. Aircraft production had collapsed. Pilot training was minimal. Fuel shortages meant that even available fighters could not fly sufficient sorties to meaningfully contest American air superiority. The air war was essentially over, not because a single battle had been lost, but because systematic American air operations, made possible by the P-51 Mustang strategic capabilities, had destroyed the Luftwaffe's ability to continue operations. Behind every statistical measure of the air war, the sorties flown, the aircraft shot down, the tonnage of bombs delivered, were individual pilots making split-second decisions in combat situations where a single mistake meant death or severe injury. Understanding the P-51 Mustang's strategic impact requires understanding the combat experience of the pilots who flew it. American pilots flying the P-51 Mustang described the aircraft with respect and appreciation. The controls were responsive and relatively light. The aircraft climbed well, accelerated smoothly, and had excellent visibility for a fighter of that era. Most importantly, pilots appreciated its reliability. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, though requiring careful management, was mechanically dependable. Aircraft returned from missions with battle damage, hydraulic lines severed, fuel leaks, and various combat injuries. Pilots trusted the Mustang to fly them back to base, even when severely damaged. Don Gentile, one of the most successful American pilots of World War II, with 19 confirmed aerial kills, described his experiences in the P-51 with emphasis on the aircraft's turn performance. Unlike the heavier P-47 Thunderbolt, which relied on speed and diving capability, the Mustang could engage German fighters in turning dogfights and prevail. Gentile's tactical approach involved using the Mustang's superior agility to maneuver into firing position on German fighters, squeeze off bursts from his 6.50 caliber machine guns, and then use the Mustang's acceleration to disengage and climb away if needed. Other pilots described similar tactical applications. Chuck Yeager, who would later become the first person to break the sound barrier, flew the P-51 Mustang in Europe and scored multiple aerial kills. His accounts emphasize the discipline required to fly escort missions, the necessity of maintaining formation with other fighters and bombers while scanning the sky for enemy aircraft, managing fuel consumption during long flights, and remaining ready to engage enemy fighters when they appeared. The P-51 made this possible by providing the range, endurance, and performance necessary to complete full escort missions. German pilots' perspectives on encountering the P-51 Mustang reveal the shock of finding that American technology had achieved parity or superiority. Pilot interviews captured after the war indicate that German pilots initially believed they faced a new development of the Spitfire. The aircraft looked similar and handled comparably. Many German pilots expressed respect for the Mustang's capabilities while remaining confident in their own flying skills and their aircraft's performance characteristics. One critical factor that emerged from pilot accounts was the importance of tactics and training. The P-51 was an excellent aircraft, but it was not invincible. German pilots who understood the Mustang's characteristics and adapted their tactics accordingly could achieve kills against Mustang pilots who flew carelessly. Conversely, American pilots who flew with discipline, maintained formation integrity, and used superior numbers effectively could consistently defeat German fighters regardless of aircraft performance differences. Mustang pilots emphasized the importance of situational awareness. The wide bubble canopy provided excellent visibility, but pilots had to use it constantly to scan for threats. Complacency was fatal. Pilots who focused exclusively on scanning for German fighters at their own altitude sometimes missed threats from above or below. Experienced pilots who survived multiple tours developed nearly unconscious scanning routines that allowed them to maintain awareness of threats in three-dimensional space. The transition from other aircraft to the P-51 Mustang required adjustment from American pilots. Pilots who had flown P-47 Thunderbolts noted that the Mustang required different tactical thinking. The Thunderbolt's strength lay in diving speed and the ability to fight at high altitudes where the supercharger provided excellent engine performance. The Mustang's strengths lay in turn radius, rate of climb, and sustained high-altitude performance. Pilots had to learn to exploit these different characteristics. German pilots transitioning to aircraft designed to counter the Mustang faced similar learning curves. The Bf-109K and FW-190D offer performance improvements over earlier variants, but pilots had to understand how to use these advantages. German tactical doctrine evolved to emphasize speed, diving ability, and the importance of not engaging in sustained turning dogfights with Mustangs. Strike and disengage tactics replaced the more aggressive engagements that earlier in the war had been tactically superior. The human factor, pilot training, experience, and morale became increasingly significant as the war progressed. American pilots, benefiting from superior production of replacement aircraft and replacement pilots, could continuously rotate experienced pilots home while maintaining or increasing the total number of trained pilots in the theater. German pilots, by contrast, were kept in combat until they were killed, captured, or disabled by injury. This attrition rate created a progressive decline in German pilot quality as experienced, skilled pilots were lost and replaced by hastily trained replacements. The P-51 Mustang's technical characteristics represented a synthesis of American industrial capability, aeronautical engineering expertise, and the willingness to adapt and incorporate innovations. The aircraft's success was not predetermined. It emerged from specific design decisions and modifications that occurred at critical moments in its development. The decision to install the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was unconventional. Mounting a British engine in an American airframe, coordinating production of thousands of components, and managing the logistics of engine supply was operationally challenging. But the decision was proven correct by performance data. The Merlin engine provided the high-altitude performance that earlier Allison-equipped Mustangs lacked. It transformed the aircraft from a useful fighter into a war-winning system. The external fuel tanks represented another critical innovation. Early drop tanks were unreliable and sometimes difficult to jettison in combat. Refinements and improvements, driven by pilot feedback and engineering development, created reliable external fuel systems that extended range from approximately 1,000 miles to over 2,000 miles. This range extension was not incremental improvement. It was a fundamental alteration of what the aircraft could accomplish strategically. American aeronautical engineers made other refinements that enhanced performance and pilot capability. Improvements to the aircraft's cooling system enhanced reliability. Modifications to the electrical systems reduced failures. Cockpit ergonomics were refined based on pilot feedback. The 6.50 caliber machine guns provided devastating firepower. The ammunition capacity and firing rate were adequate to destroy German fighters with focus bursts. German technical development, though innovative in many respects, was constrained by different factors. German jet engine development produced the Jumo 004 engine that powered the Me-262, a design ahead of its time in many respects. But jet engines, in 1944 and 1945, were unreliable and required exotic materials and sophisticated manufacturing techniques. Production was limited by the destruction of supporting industries and the diversion of resources to conventional fighter production. The Bf-109K variant represented German adaptation to the Mustang threat. The aircraft featured an upgraded engine, improved armament, and refinements to fuel systems and aerodynamics. Performance data indicated that the Bf-109K was competitive with the P-51 at altitudes above 30,000 feet. But production of the Bf-109K was limited, and pilots familiar with earlier Bf-109 variants required transition training to employ the new aircraft's capabilities effectively. By the time Bf-109K aircraft were available in operational numbers, the overall situation had deteriorated so significantly that technical improvements to individual aircraft could not reverse the strategic outcome. The FW-190D represented the other German adaptation. This variant, featuring a different engine and overall redesign compared to earlier FW-190 variants, achieved performance comparable to or exceeding the P-51 Mustang in certain regimes. FW-190D pilots reported favorable encounters with Mustang pilots when tactical conditions favored German tactics. But again, production numbers were insufficient, and the FW-190D arrived too late to influence the overall course of the air war. American industrial capacity overwhelmed German technical innovation. For every advanced German fighter that rolled off production lines, American factories produced dozens of P-51 Mustangs. For every Luftwaffe pilot trained in flying the new German fighters, American training programs produced dozens of pilots. The asymmetry was not one of technology, it was one of production capacity and strategic resources. German engineers and pilots were not inferior to their American counterparts. In many cases, German technical innovation was impressive and ahead of contemporary American development. But in an air war, where production capacity, pilot training throughput, and strategic resources determined outcomes, technical innovation alone could not overcome the fundamental imbalance. The P-51 Mustang was not the most technically advanced fighter of the war. It was instead the most effective synthesis of performance, production capability, and strategic deployment that any belligerent achieved. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe existed primarily as a name rather than as an effective fighting force. Pilot accounts, intelligence reports, and operational records from this period document the systematic collapse of German air power. The P-51 Mustang, though certainly not the only factor contributing to this collapse, was a critical element in the progression that led to German defeat. In November 1944, German commanders authorized Operation Bodenplatte, a last-attempt massive fighter offensive designed to regain air superiority and demonstrate that the Luftwaffe remained a viable military force. On January 1, 1945, over 800 German fighters launched coordinated attacks against Allied air bases in Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The operation achieved tactical surprise and destroyed or damaged numerous American aircraft on the ground. But the strategic outcome proved disastrous for Germany. In air-to-air engagements with American Mustang pilots, German fighter pilots were systematically defeated. Inexperienced German pilots, thrust into combat for the first time in the offensive, encountered experienced American pilots and were shot down at appalling rates. The Luftwaffe achieved its momentary objective of surprise, but the losses, estimated at over 400 German fighters destroyed or damaged, were catastrophic. German aircraft production could not replace these losses. Pilot training programs could not produce replacements for the experienced pilots killed in the operation. Operation Bodenplatte marked the effective end of the Luftwaffe as a viable combat force. After January 1945, German fighters appeared increasingly infrequently. By spring 1945, German pilots were conserving fuel, flying limited sorties, and focusing on survival. Combat encounters between P-51 Mustangs and German fighters became rare because German fighters, lacking fuel and facing numerical impossibilities, chose not to engage. American air superiority, established and maintained by P-51 Mustangs and other American fighters, became so complete that strategic bombing could proceed virtually unopposed. The bombing campaigns of early 1945 destroyed remaining German oil production facilities, rail yards, and military installations. The Luftwaffe, despite possessing fighter aircraft, ammunition, and pilots, could not contest this bombing because doing so would consume fuel and aircraft at rates that German production could not sustain. Captured German pilots and staff officers, interrogated after the war, provided retrospective analysis of the Luftwaffe's collapse. Consistent themes emerged. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang had changed the air war fundamentally. Earlier American fighters could be defeated through tactical superiority and careful pilot management. The Mustang eliminated these advantages. German pilots recognized that the aircraft was competitive or superior to German fighters at most altitudes. More significantly, American pilots, supported by superior production and training systems, could sustain combat operations at levels that German replacement production could not match. One captured German general officer, asked to analyze what could have changed the air war outcome, identified the critical moments. If German air superiority had been maintained in 1943, before American long-range escorts became available, the bomber offensive might have been halted. But once the P-51 Mustang achieved operational effectiveness with sufficient numbers, the air war's outcome became essentially determined. Subsequent technological developments and tactical innovations could modify conditions, but could not reverse the fundamental imbalance that the Mustang created. The final operations of the Luftwaffe, in the chaotic days as Allied forces advanced into Germany and the Soviet army attacked from the east, consisted primarily of German pilots flying desperate defensive sorties from increasingly threatened airfields. Fuel shortages became so severe that flying sortie frequencies were reduced to perhaps one mission per pilot every few days. Airfields were overrun by advancing ground forces. Aircraft were destroyed on the ground or flown to safer bases that were themselves threatened within days. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, the Luftwaffe ceased to exist as an organized military force. The P-51 Mustang was retired from active service with the United States Air Force in 1957, over 12 years after World War II ended. But its impact on military aviation, on the strategy of air warfare, and on the outcome of World War II in Europe extended far beyond its operational service. Understanding its historical significance requires assessing both its direct impact on the air war and its broader influence on military thinking and technological development. The direct contribution to American victory in Europe was substantial and measurable. The Mustang enabled sustained strategic bombing campaigns that destroyed German war production, fuel supplies, and transportation networks. By maintaining air superiority throughout 1944 and 1945, American fighters, primarily Mustangs, prevented the Luftwaffe from defending German territory. Estimates suggest that P-51 pilots alone were credited with destroying or damaging over 5,000 Luftwaffe aircraft during World War II. More importantly, the Mustang's range and endurance provided the security that bomber formations needed to reach deep targets in Germany and Axis territory and return intact. The strategic lesson that emerged from the Mustang's success influenced military thinking for decades. Air superiority was not simply desirable. It was absolutely essential for conducting military operations. An air force that could not contest an opponent's air superiority was functionally incapable of defending its own territory or supporting ground operations. The P-51 Mustang demonstrated that achieving air superiority required not just having fighter aircraft, but having fighters that could project power across strategic distances. Technological adaptability emerged as another critical lesson. The Mustang succeeded not because American engineers anticipated all its uses or capabilities at the design stage, but because the aircraft was designed to be modified, upgraded, and refined based on operational experience. The installation of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the development of reliable external fuel tanks, refinements to armament systems, and modifications to cockpit systems all emerged from practical operational feedback. The willingness to make substantial modifications to a successful aircraft design, rather than attempting to design the perfect aircraft initially, contributed significantly to the Mustang's ultimate effectiveness. For German military planners and engineers assessing the war's outcome after 1945, the Mustang represented a tragic validation of pre-war warnings that had been ignored. German aeronautical experts had warned Hitler in the late 1930s that America, with its vast industrial capacity and technical capability, would ultimately overwhelm German air forces if war continued for years. The Mustang was evidence of this reality. American industrial production, though starting later than German programs, ultimately surpassed German capabilities in both quality and quantity. The P-51 Mustang influenced fighter aircraft design for decades after the war. The basic principles of aerodynamic efficiency, the importance of engine performance, the value of combat maneuverability, and the significance of pilot visibility in fighter design remained relevant as aviation technology advanced. Modern fighter aircraft, though incorporating jet propulsion and electronic systems that the Mustang's designers never contemplated, still embody principles validated by the Mustang's success. In broader historical terms, the P-51 Mustang exemplified the convergence of military necessity, technological capability, and industrial production. No single factor, not the aircraft design itself, not pilot training, not tactics, not industrial production, would have been sufficient to change the air war's outcome. The synthesis of all these factors created the conditions that allowed American air forces to achieve air superiority and maintain it throughout the war's final years. The psychological impact of the Mustang's arrival and effectiveness should not be underestimated. For German pilots who had fought with confidence through 1943, the appearance of an American fighter that could match or exceed their own aircraft performance was shocking and demoralizing. The certainty of victory that had characterized Luftwaffe culture through much of the war was replaced by calculation, caution, and ultimately, despair. For American pilots, conversely, the Mustang provided equipment that was competitive with German fighters, supporting changes in tactics and strategy that ultimately proved superior. When historians examine World War II's air war over Europe, the P-51 Mustang emerges as the critical technological innovation that transformed the strategic situation. Before the Mustang, the bombing offensive was failing due to unsustainable losses. After the Mustang achieved operational effectiveness, the bombing offensive became the dominant American strategy for degrading German war production and supporting the eventual Allied invasion of France. The aircraft itself, as a weapon system, was not revolutionary. It did not possess capabilities that German engineers could not have achieved. But it appeared at the critical moment when its capabilities precisely matched operational requirements. It could be produced in vast numbers. American pilots could be trained to use it effectively. Most critically, it could project power across European distances while maintaining sufficient fuel and performance to engage and defeat German fighters. Today, more than 80 years after the P-51 Mustang first flew in combat, it remains one of the most respected and celebrated fighter aircraft of the World War II era. Surviving examples are preserved in museums and private collections. Enthusiasts and historians continue to study its design and operational history. Veterans who flew the aircraft describe their experiences with deep respect and pride. The Luftwaffe's belief that they ruled the sky, that German air superiority was secure and permanent, was proven wrong not by a single aircraft or a single battle, but through the systematic application of American industrial capacity, pilot training excellence, and strategic determination. The P-51 Mustang was the instrument through which this determination was expressed. It took the capabilities that American industry could produce and created a fighter that could match and defeat the Luftwaffe in sustained combat across the skies of Europe. In doing so, it fundamentally altered the course of World War II and validated principles of air warfare that would influence military strategy for generations to come.